Hello and welcome. We return once more for World Building Wednesday. Well, other than the fact that it's not Wednesday, but that sometimes occurs. Unfortunately, on Wednesday, I was busy, working with the citizenry and all that, and working on paperwork, lots and lots of imperial paperwork. But we return. And, as it's technically Miscellaneous Friday, we'll do Worldbuilding Wednesday things because that's the entire point of Miscellaneous Friday. It is whatever happens. Eventually, we'll do another game on Friday, a video game also, but I still need to get all that set up after last time's complete blunder at technical issues and all that. So, yes. As it's technically Worldbuilding Wednesday, of course as it's Miscellaneous Friday, but we're doing Worldbuilding Wednesday, we'll ramble and go over just random things. Like I said, lots of paperwork recently. Managing an empire is always difficult. Well, I'd hardly call it managing an empire. It's 3-star systems, but, it's still a lot of paperwork. Let's see. Well, where to begin? That is the question. I suppose we'll begin here. Last time, of course, we were setting up our entire series of encounters, but that is the continued plan. I suppose it's Worldbuilding Wednesday, we'll ramble a bit. So there's, some of the things that have been being worked on, of course, are refining and fixing some aspects of the nation system, running nations and organizations and all that, which is where empire management paperwork comes in. But yes, managing nations and all that, and just updates to that whole system, which involves a lot of work, specifically in regards to balancing certain things and getting other things to work well together. Because the goal, of course, when having nation management in a tabletop RPG is to have it complex enough to have options and all that, but simple enough to complex enough to have options, but simple enough to work and be easy to use. But there's one added problem for us here at Galactic Requiem Industries, and that is, of course, how do I put it? Specifically, um, specifically the realism aspect for us at least, because as I think I've said many a time, we strive to have a simulated universe and have it accurate to the way, that the Galactic Requiem universe works, which is an added layer of difficulty on top. Because it's one thing to have a system with options that's doable. It's another thing to have a system that is simple. That's doable. Having a system that is simple with lots of options, still relatively doable. Having that, both those things, and having it be relatively realistic to simulate, a universe somewhat accurately, is another layer of complexity added on top of that. And that can get difficult. I mean, I'll be specific even. Why not? There's no reason not to. When running a nation, there are certain factors that I am working on that are specifically more complicated. For instance, not this one's not really complicated, but annoying. nations, in the way we run them, there's the base scale. There's larger scales, which is easy. Then there's smaller scales, which pose certain problems. Now, a lot of time, we just divide by 10. For instance, a pop unit, pop being population, of course, is at standard scale. One pop unit is 1 billion people. Simple enough. In one scale down, one pop unit is 100 million people. Another step down, one pop unit is 10 million people, and the final scale, which is the final step, is one pop unit is 1 million people. The problem we face is the design we have set up for determining the amount of soldiers a nation can field, because it's loosely based on its max pop. I believe I'd have to double check. But when you go to the smaller scales, it gets a bit small. And also funding and supplying units gets a bit complicated. Not really complicated, but there's certain... There's so much that, like, there's a lot. And I'm conflicted as to whether it's worth right now going into the details of how and why it's complicated, but it is. Let's do that. Look, I'm usually working here, basically, for the most part. I mean, on occasion, I'll ask my fellow Galactic Requiem co-founders. I'll ask them on occasion, get their input on things, but a lot of the time, it's just me staring at a screen, contemplating, thinking, ironing out systems, and being like, does this work? And just for the most part, a lot of it is just me working the systems out. Like I said, on occasion, I'll ask my associates, and they'll help out, and their help is always greatly appreciated. But it's a lot of time just staring at a screen, trying to figure this stuff out. So, I mean, I might as well, for once, throw the processes out there. Yeah. So let me find the right book here. Unfortunately, I can't bring it up on screen. So my apologies about that. But let's see, hopefully it doesn't lag. Here we are. Specifically the document that it's stored in sometimes lags. Let's see. So, at base, nations run on 2 systems. I suppose there's always so much that, even when working on Galactic Requiem, I never know what part to work on, and I sort of freeze up on indecision of what needs work, because there's always so much that needs work. Let's see. So, specifically, nations and organizations. Both. So, an organization has a stat block. And I think I've shown one of those before. We could probably bring that up on screen, because I'm pretty sure I pasted one of those into the document that we have visible. Here we are. If it loads. There we go. Go down to the bottom of the document, because I'm pretty sure that's where it is. Yes, perfect. So, a nation and an organization both have this. They're slightly different between them, because organizations and nations, they work together. I've been over this probably before, probably many times. In Galactic Requiem, everything scales. Everything scales. By that, I mean there's no separate system or rules for interaction. I mean, it's complicated. That's why we get so rambly. Everything has rules and caveats and like things that go together and explanations, which is why we're so rambly. So, basically, the best way to describe it is every tier of thing can affect every other tier of thing. For instance, in simple terms, of course, organizations work differently because you can't shoot a non-physical thing per se. But a character is on the same scale. I mean, starships have a different movement scale, but a pistol that you're shooting rolls two, on average, d6s. Three. So a pistol on average rolls 2d6s for a single shot. A starship rolls anywhere from 5d10 times 2 plus and has around 40,000 health, that's including armor and shields, on average 30 to 40,000 health. I believe the exact average I have rough estimation is like 37,500. Don't ask how I know that. No, just working on it constantly. I'm pretty sure you times 1,000 by 37.5, so it becomes 37,500 or something like that. But basically, it's on the same scale as a person. A person's health is on average like 20. So these are actually on the same scale. A starship's shots are not like there's a separate system you need to transfer them through or anything. A starship can just shoot a person. Of course, there's modifiers and everything, but basically, everything's on the same system and or at least completely interactable with each other. Everything works together, which not every system, not every tabletop system has. Sometimes they have separate things. Like they have ways of them interacting, but they're separate. I mean, don't get me wrong. I don't think I've been over it here. A lot of world generation for like world maps, I use some of the traveler rules for world map generation. For instance, hexes, specifically hex map distances of how to generate the distances of hex maps and then zooming in, which is because it's just so useful and great. The way that they do it is, I haven't found a better way for world map zooming in and out and grids to make it work. It's just ideal, to me at least. So that works. But the reason I bring that up is because specifically, I believe an example is Traveler. Their ships have rules and all that, but there's no real direct anything for a ship shooting. I think there might be, but it's very complicated in Traveler for a ship to shoot a person or a ship to shoot a tank. I believe you can, but there's like you have to convert things if I recall. It's a bit complicated because ships use a different health system or something like that. I think it was Traveler. Anyway, it works in a sort of complex way. While here, a ship's damage is already calculated to shoot a person. It can just roll. Of course, when you convert to mass combat scale, the stats all do convert, but it still works between each other basically easily. Same with nations and people and everything. Of course, you can't shoot something, but say, as you can see there, resources. You can damage a nation's resources by destroying its resource locations, things that provide it resource score, and so forth. Basically, you can affect it as a person, and everything affects everything, basically. Anyway, so one of the problems faced by nations is so when making organizations and nations, they need to be able to interact with the world. And that's where units come in. Units being literal groups of people. Worker units being 100 people, advanced units being 50 people. And you can have a large number of these because an organization can have a large number of these. This ranges from, say, I believe 100 worker was it was a number of worker units. I could always bring up the sheet here. It was a lot of worker units, but it's basically 100 advanced units. I know that much because it's 5 times 4. And basically, that's how many of the lowest tier advanced units you can have. So you could theoretically have 100 units, which is, annoying to manage. But it's not like necessarily a player group has that, and it's not like you need to move all of them every turn. It's just they are there for use, which makes it means it can get complicated on the larger scale because there's a lot of things to do. And we haven't really found a way to simplify that yet. But it's not like you need to use every unit. They can not act, or you can have them act. And you might want them to stay somewhere. And basically, there's a lot of things to move when you have the max scale organization. Of course, a small scale organization doesn't have that problem. A small scale organization could have like one unit. So that problem's irrelevant. But for a major, like a major nation that has, well, organization, let's say a megacorp, a entire full global megacorp probably has maxed everything. So it probably has 100 units of advanced units and like 1,000 to 10,000. I can actually do the math on that because I know that the fact that it caps at 1,000,000 individuals. Of course, you can have subsidiary organizations which increase that. 100. Nope. 10,000, I believe, or something, because math. Anyway, point is, it gets complicated with at the larger scale, but I mean, that's just life, though, isn't it? But it's hard to find a way to simplify that. And same with, like I said, organizations, nations works similarly, but with slightly different rules. But basically, it's just complicated. It's all complicated. I wouldn't even know where to begin explaining how this works. I mean, I say that it's complicated on my end. Of course, I do my best to make it simple for players. For instance, there's a nice, handy action chart for both nations and organizations that is basically, here's basically the options available. Of course, this is a tabletop RPG. Don't get me wrong. It's not like we say you're limited to these actions. There's basically, these are the actions you basically need to or can choose to take, and you can do whatever. For instance, we don't go, well, you can only do this thing. This is the action. We go, here's your thing. Here's the actions the rough, vague actions you can take. So a player can say, I want to try and, like one of my players did. One of my players was, we were running a thing. They had a little bar. They had a little bar, and it was on the organization scale because it's a little business, and it's not directly stated as an action you can take, but the actions are use the CRISP system to take actions in conflict against other organizations. And so the player said, can I start a media campaign against this other bar? And so using the rules for that, we can realize that a media campaign uses the stats of, well, influence, well, specifically impress, resolve, and whatever other things they wish to use to do it, basically. And we can generate a what roles would likely be needed and so forth. So despite there not necessarily being direct rules for a media campaign versus another organization, there's a solid enough rule set that we can do that within the framework. That's the word I'm looking for, framework. We can do that, and the framework allows us to figure out with consistency what would happen. So if somebody else decided to do the same thing, it's not like we're coming up with it on the fly, but the framework means that it works consistently every time. But you can take basically any action, and no matter what it is, it will work consistently every time due to the framework. I'm not saying you'll succeed every time, because it would be several rolls would be made and all that, and see whether you succeed based on your skills and the role and all that. but it's consistent in the sense that it works roughly the same each time. Of course, modifiers can differ. For instance, if you say, well, I have this entire thing that I bought from my organization, billboards and so forth. So yes, that would apply modifiers and all that, which would basically allow it to work within the framework, but still be custom and all that. And it has a set way it works. But basically, so it's simple for players to run nations or organizations and all that. But the back end, it's the back end, specifically how it all works on my end. Because there's problems that are on the larger scale, like I said, and certain things that just don't happen to work. Like it's still constantly being worked on. It is one of the more I was going to say most, but it's not the most, but it is one of the more not really newer, but work in progress. Not work in progress because it's constantly being worked on. So, like the most one of the more patched things, constant being worked on, updated, because it works, it gets what needs to be done, but it doesn't do it in an ideal way. I mean, it does it fine for players. It does it fine for players, but on my end, it doesn't work in an ideal way. I see numbers and I say, this doesn't represent what I want it to, or and so forth and all that. I mean, it works because, like I said, basically, not only does it work for players, but like it works the same for NPCs and world factions and all that as it does players. So it's not like tweaking it unbalances it or anything. It works the same for everybody, basically, even including NPCs and all that. But it's not ideal on my end. Like I said, military sizes, resource supplies, certain modifiers, there are problems on my end with it. So, working on ironing those things out. Of course, we always need to add more items, equipment, translate items and equipment, update their stats, import those. There's always so much work to do on it. And so, on top of course, working on our script for our lore series. I mean, at this point, honestly, given the length, I mean, to be fair, given the problems we faced, I sort of had to stop working on the script for a short while because I was working on other things. And then on top of, getting the system refined, which is constant, and updating items and all that, there's just so much to do, And so slowly we're chipping away at it all, chipping away at it all. So, eventually. I mean, I could just work on the news series, which would be faster, which is Galactic News, brought to you by me, Lord Basil. And we'll get you that galactic news, which we can work on. Of course, I have things I want to do for that, admittedly, far more advanced things. See, the lore series, of course, we want nice things in the lore series. We want nice things that are, good, quality, and all that. More than just script quality, I mean display quality. And so, at least for the lore, it's literally me explaining the lore. So that's easier. I mean, quality is of course nice, but it's so much simpler to have that done because it's other than the scripting. The scripting is what makes that complicated because I want to make sure I get you all the info on a topic accurately. So that. But the scripting for lore is what takes so long with it. Quality wise, I can just go here, which is our little news and or room with a desk, and we can talk about all the stuff and, Of course, I'd love to be able to have pictures in the background of what we're talking about, but that's far off. Same with the news series, but I want more newsy displays, which takes a lot more work to set up. But news is so much easier to script because it's just talking about galactic events, which does involve lore and all that. Don't get me wrong, but it's so much less having to be absolutely accurate. News isn't always accurate. It's so much easier to script, but I wanted to have more quality in the display, you know? Oh, here we are. So there's that, but we'll eventually get those working. Yeah, I'm thinking we'll do cheap news at first. We'll raise production quality over time, but we'll do news every so often because given what I've seen of working on law scripts, it will take so much longer to work on law scripts because I want them to be accurate. When I say accurate, what I mean is I want all the information on a topic in that video. You know what I mean? I don't want to, because if I have a topic, which is our first video is going to be on, FTL. If I have a video on FTL and I miss something, what am I going to do? Make a second video on FTL that just covers that one thing? I'd have to make a correction series in which I fix whatever I missed and basically add addendums and all that to on different topics. And so I just want everything in the initial draft, ideally. So that takes a while. Anyway, we're talking about rules, not other things. Let's see. So basically, with nations, there's a bit of, well, of course, there's complexity, but like, that's the problem. Trying to figure out how exactly to fix it. For instance, a lot of, let me just bring it up so it's in front of my screen. Here we are. For instance, nations have a variety of resources that they use, basically. On the larger scale, it becomes irrelevant. It really, that's the thing. That's one of the problems we face. Nations have resources. On the larger scale, resources become irrelevant. And it's both accurate and troubling. I mean, it helps simplify things on the larger scale, but it seems like we have resources for no reason. If you get what I'm saying, because the minute you have a civilized system, resources become somewhat irrelevant. But also, they can be relevant. It's complicated. That's my entire point. It's overly complicated, but is it though? It's see, this is the thing. I will sit there staring at the screen going, just like I did there. It's overly complicated. Is it though? Does it work? But what about the scale? But it becomes useless at a large scale. But it still sometimes might be useful at a large scale. And like just things like that when figuring out how to get it all to work. So, you know, that's a lot of what is involved in designing a system. It's not really world building, but designing systems and all that for tabletop RPGs. Of course, we've already combined like 50 pre-existing systems to get everything to work the way it is perfectly. Well, not perfectly, but ideally. Good enough. Which has its own complications, combining 50 different systems and getting them all to work together. I say different systems. They're based, I mean, it's all D20, so, you know. But they're, I mean, sometimes there are certain things that aren't, but, you know, it all loosely meshes together, but different systems, like there's so many D20 systems that are just so slightly different from each other, and getting them to work together to make this not easy. Anyway, so a lot of that, and just balancing things, getting things to work, stuff like that. And preparing, of course, for just all sorts of stuff. Running campaigns means I always have to make maps, and maps, stats, encounters, plots, making all that stuff for the campaigns that we run, of course. Not only our solo, but for the player groups and all that. Just lots of things to do. So, that's what we've been working on, and hopefully we'll get some things done. Let's see here. So, what other part of it? For instance, I suppose we'll talk about it. I mean, originally, the nation system we used, for instance, here's a simple example. The nation system we used for running space nations used to be from a basically medieval book for running a medieval kingdom. So, well, part of it. Half of nation running is from that. The other half with the stat block you see here, organization stat block, like I said, nations have a similar, is from a completely different thing, but I meshed them both together to work. And then on top of that, making something that was designed for medieval scale to a space game that takes place on a galactic scale. I mean, you can see how that can be, it can have unintended problems. But we've ironed a lot of that out. For instance, one of the things was food used to be an item, a resource that you had to manage, But we've changed that to utilities because, I mean, it's the space age. Electricity, food, etc., all covered under utilities and all that. And then other such things, then we got all the other resources that are only somewhat useful. I mean, I say they become useless at a large scale. That's not entirely true. Specifically because they're used to build, that you use them to build the things for your nation. So they're not entirely useless. I don't know why I said they were used. Oh, because it's complicated. It's all complicated. But basically, you use them to build structures and the like. Structures are, fun things. Of course, this can be converted back to medieval nation running, which is what smaller scale stuff is for. And which is why our items are generic. For instance, we have utilities, building material, better building material, military grade material, very common material, credit units, rare material, very rare material, taxes, exotic goods, military supplies, magic items, and base goods, which are used in a variety of structures to build, like settlements, colonies, cities, megacities, arcology blocks, floating cities, shipyards, orbital shipyards, military outposts, mines, factories, corporations, which you attach to your cities for additional effects. All sorts of stuff like that. And then there's, the fun structures, which are not easy to build. They require lots of resources, but are, you know, somebody who does sci-fi, they're the fun structures. Here we are. Skyhooks, mass driver launches, space fountains and space towers, launch loops, power satellites, O'Neill cylinders, orbital logistics rings, standard orbital rings, space elevators, planetary thrusters at the higher levels, McKendree cylinders, bishop rings, banks, orbitals, Yucca monopolises, all that fun stuff, even ring worlds. You can craft, like, so worlds have slots and all that. But why do you need to care about worlds and slots and how much pop you can put on a planet when you can build a ring world? Build a ring world. I mean, of course, those are very difficult to build, but you can. You can also build a Dyson swarm far easier and far more modularly. So one would say building a Dyson swarm is always, it's easier because you literally build space stations that basically initially give you pop. So why would you ever build a ring world? And I would argue, yeah, theoretically, why would a player ever build a ring world? And I've learned, given my players, they would go out of their way to build a ring world because it's cool. Not because it's necessarily, look, they'd go, I know for a fact that they'd go, why build a ring world when a Dyson swarm is theoretically easier and gives more benefit to building? Because ring worlds are cool. And they would build a ring world. Because many times there's been situations where something's not ideal. It's not ideal, it's not good, it's less efficient, but my players will do it because it's cool. So, you know, other things, I mean, there are also other benefits to it, but other things, everything else I listed have a mechanical, I mean, ring worlds do too. Don't get me wrong, ring worlds have significant mechanical benefit. But all the other things I listed are far, I wouldn't say more beneficial, but more directly beneficial because you don't need to wait till they're not super long to build. For instance, they give you bonuses to your economy skill for nations or fabrication or all sorts of different things. And then you get your elite units, send them out to do actions out against other nations. And basically, there's also, if you're running nations, organizations have similar but different systems. If you have a nation, of course, that nation's going to have different political groups, and that's simulated. There's different political groups in the nation. I believe there's 10 generic categories, and basically these different groups have different goals, and based on what your government setup is and what policies you're enacting, these different groups will try and vie for power, and based on how you're running your nation, they could seize power from you. I mean, not only through rebellion, but through election. For instance, if you're a democratic nation and you have elections, theoretically, given the way the nation rules works, depending on how you have it set, the base is 1 year, but you can have it set differently based on the laws of the nation. Every 1 year, an election would be held, and theoretically you could stay in power, or maybe there's limits to how many times you can, and other groups can try and take over, and there's entire things. Like there's different government types with different rules, and how they all work, and all of that, which is all, part of running a nation. Different groups doing different things, and corporations trying to do this, political parties trying to do that, foreign nations doing this, all sorts of stuff. Of course, we here in the Empire don't need to worry about that. We only need to worry about other imperial nations. And, of course, our vassals. But it's not like we have elections here. Our titles are somewhat, well, I mean, of course, titles can be granted, usually earned by gaining a star system. You capture a star system, you can become a titled holder of land in the Empire. If you conquest a star system, of course, and claim it for the Empire. And then, of course, there's but from there, it's sort of a hereditary thing for the most part. So it's not like we worry about elections and all that. Mostly rebellions. Not really. Sort of. Partially. Mostly other lords trying to steal our worlds. Anyway. internal conflict in the Empire is technically allowed. Lords are allowed to wage war on other lords and all that to a degree. I think I've been over this before, but stuff like that. Of course, Imperial lords killing other Imperial lords is considered, well, near socially abhorrent. I believe that's the correct word. But basically, it's highly frowned upon for an Imperial lord to kill another Imperial lord. Take their territory, fine. Kill them, frowned upon. And, all sorts of Imperial laws and all that. Anyway. So basically, there's a lot to running a nation. Gather resources, move units, and then you use this sheet, similar to this, but literally says nation at the top, to do a variety of other things. And I mean, the great thing about organizations and nations is even if you don't own one, but you're a part of one and supported by one, they can support you with their stats. Basically, nations, much like a character can assist, nations can assist you on things, assuming, they're willing to, and give you resources, and there's lots of stuff you can do with them. You can request resources, you can get statuses, and there's entire things for not necessarily running a nation, but or an organization, but simply just being a part of a nation or organization. And so, like I said, the entire point of Galactic Requiem is to simulate, well, the universe of Galactic Requiem. So, that's what we do here. But that's, like I said, that's where the complexity comes in getting the systems to work together and getting things to be ideal, which is why we're always tweaking them and getting them to work together perfectly. Never perfectly, though. That's the goal, to achieve that. Never been achieved, but, fixing it until it works to a degree that is acceptable well, I mean, it currently works, but, to a degree that's more ideal. But like I said, that's always where complexity meets ease of use. That's always the problem. Things being complex versus ease of use, which is why a lot of systems are optional. Of course, there's the base rules, but like subsystems. For instance, when running an organization, there is properties and assets, as you can probably see right there. When you have a property, you can just get a generic property that is basically like, here's your property, it provides you a bonus on this. But there's a completely optional system for players that want the basically gritty complexity of it to go, I don't want random generic bonuses for my building. My character went out and salvaged 20 computers from the wasteland and brought them back. Okay, you've salvaged 20 computers and brought them back. So these computers will give you, as you have 20 of them, that is enough to acquire a +2 to computer use in the building and so forth, or, a +3 toolkit. You have 3 +3 toolkits, which is enough to get you a +1. There's an entire system for calculating it. I don't have it open in front of me, but basically, you can literally design a building and its modifiers individually with literal in-game items, because of course, it's a TTRPG. Of course, there's individual items in the game. You can have a +3 computer or I have a bunch of weapons that I've stocked in an armory. So you can literally basically have your skills and stats modified by these small things, or custom design a building with its modifiers individually if you care enough to. But it's not a requirement. You could just take the generic bonuses. So it really depends on how much detail the player wants to go into for the system. And just things like that for the most part. And so yeah, that is some of nations and organizations. Let's see here. And of course, as a nation, you can raise, I mean, even as a corporation, but less so. Nation scale, it's far easier, but you can raise armies, fleets, send them from point A to point B. You do have to raise resources, train your troops to a reasonable level, and all this, and then, engage in combat. Specifically, usually, in that case, it's mass combat against other things. Of course, a nation can use its units to engage individuals, but that's a bit overkill. But, they can even split their units up to smaller units and then use those to engage and so forth. And then nations have organizations that make them up, and then there's ministries that give bonuses on different things. It's literally an entire series of systems to running these things. But like I said, on my end, it's relatively complex, difficult, but on the player end, it's tried it tries to be, and I hope, at least as far as I've seen, achieves a streamlined nature for the players on their thing. You know? It's I want to do this. Well, on my end, it's complicated, but for them, but that means for them, I look at my sheet and it's like, okay, they're trying to do this. Here's the framework for that. Here's the modifiers for that. Okay, so you want to try and achieve this, this, and this is basically you're going to want to roll this and apply this modifier, or you want to do this, you might want to build this then, and so forth, making it simple for them, but you know. And of course, all of that requires testing, and so we do that, and a lot of that requires tweaking the rules and testing the rules and doing that over and over until it works. So yeah, let's see. And we have basically rules for everything. So, that is the goal. I believe we have it all down for the most part for, simulating a universe. So, of course, with a bit of hand waving and all that, we don't, we can randomly generate star systems and make them somewhat accurate. The star systems can have different atmospheres, different orbital object types. We haven't done that here, I don't think, because we haven't done a lot of galactic map work in our series here. We might do some of that sometime. But basically, we can generate star systems with all sorts of interesting facts and civilizations and all that. But obviously, we don't go as far as to actually simulate, formation of a star system. That's a bit much. We don't have a supercomputer here. So, we don't simulate star formation, but, we can randomly generate star systems with all sorts of um, accurate objects, and we know when they're not accurate. I happen to, on occasion, used to study astronomy to a degree. So, we try and be accurate with our stellar generation, random generation. Of course, we know where we've broken certain rules. Of course, yes, there's no FTL, and we have to hand wave the exact power output of certain things. And, there's certain things we do for simplicity's sake. I mean, everybody does for the most part when making a sci-fi universe. Because even when you make a hard sci-fi, you basically have some elements that you have to not have. You know, it's not like you can't make a completely hard sci-fi. you know, even famous sci-fis that are considered hard sci-fi have things that they hand wave on, despite all the very nice, what do you call it? Despite all the usually very nice ship physics and the way ships work in the Expanse series, they do have their, super technologies and, you know, alien megagates and all that. So, even relatively hard sci-fi sections have their non. And of course, we have certain physics things we break, of course. For instance, we've semi-accurately represented the amount of M-class stars generated and then went back on it because the galaxy's full of M-class stars and I despise them. Now, personally, it's not like I despise M-class stars, but, you know, when you have a random generator and you want to make a sci-fi universe with, you know, interesting star systems, and every single system you generate is an M-class star in that the system has. You go, okay, I'll use this nice random generator to generate a star. Oh, it's all M-class stars. I got a trinary system. Crazy. A trinary system, 3 stars. Oh, they're all M-class. Isn't that great? Because, I mean, I'm not sure about the statistics in astronomy of M-class stars being in trinary systems, because gravitational. So, nope, nope, we're not going on a tangent there. We're not going to talk about astronomy and astrophysics and specifically the types of orbits of stars. But, okay, we will, for just a split second. So, stars in their orbits, as far as I recall, this is from memory, so I might get something wrong here. This is from years back memory. Stars are actually, if I recall correctly, more common to be in binary, maybe even trinary. I know that binary systems, if I recall correctly, are more common than singular stars. I think. It's been years since I've studied astronomy. I'm pretty sure binary systems are more common than single systems. I could be wrong about that one. But basically, in star systems with multiple stars, there are different ways they're linked. It's all fuzzy. It's, like I said, it's been years. But basically, there's basically a best way to put it is sort of like a chart of how it works. You don't have three, for the most part, let's say you have a trinary system. You generally don't have three. I mean, I think it's possible, but you don't usually have 3 stars orbiting each other. What you have is one star orbiting the primary star, and then the third star orbiting that secondary star. And you can have star systems with lots of stars, but it basically goes down a chart of orbits. Basically, one thing orbits that thing, and that suborbiting thing has an orbit, and or if it's not that suborbiting thing having an orbit, I believe what's more common is you have the primary star, you have the secondary, and then you have the third star orbiting both of those stars. Basically, the gravity center of both those inner stars has a star orbiting that or something like that. Basically, it's like I said, it's been forever, but what I call is like, it's not 3 things orbiting, each other. It's one orbits the other, or sometimes you have 2 stars in the center orbiting a singular point in the middle of space or slightly inside of one star. Basically, orbits are never really, for the most part, even with something as small as a planet and a star, it shifts the center of the orbit from the center of the star ever so slightly, but it shifts the orbit away from the center of the star. It's one way we can, if I recall correctly, well, not we, but you Elysians on your Earth can basically determine if there are planets in orbit of a star. Basically, a planet will pull the star around slightly. And the fact that the star, because the star moves in a little orbit around the center, because the center is not in the center of the star because it's pulled off point by the mass of the system. So an object orbiting the star makes that star spin a little bit, which you can theoretically detect. And then, of course, a stellar transit, well, not a stellar transit, but a planetary transit in front of the star, depending on the size of the planet, causes a dip in the luminosity that you can detect. Also, a neat thing about when a planet passes before a star, it also theoretically can create, I believe they do, not theoretically, they do, theoretically is whether you Elysians can detect them. I believe you can detect them. But basically, when a planet travels in front of a star, the light basically, I forget what the exact terminology is, but it's like a spectrum, a light spectrum or something. I forget the terminology, but basically, emission line spectrum, I believe it was, or emission lines. Basically, the light shining through the atmosphere of whatever object is transiting in front of the star can be picked up, and basically, the emission lines are basically blocked by certain elements, which basically can tell you loosely what elements are in the thing that the light's shining through, which is a neat way to determine basically atmospherics of exoplanets and the like. And so, there's lots of stuff like that. Of course, we don't simulate that. That's a bit much. But basically, we know for the most part where we're breaking certain things for the sake of a universe that runs. Also, it's not our physics are directly more slightly different than yours, so things work slightly differently, but for the most part we know where and why. Anyway, so there's just stuff like that when designing, and we'll work on that sometime. Let's actually bring one of those up on screen. That's always fun. Of course, our adventure, Juliana Aldis. That's her name, right? Yep. For instance, our adventure, Juliana Aldis, is nowhere near where I'm going to show you, because she's in Terran space over near what we consider civilized space, well, what they call civilized space. But here we are. This is where our first streamed character was. In the deep frontier, for instance, you see here a system. Here we have a template. This isn't the one, this is literally a different system, but basically this is what a full system looks like, without the lines, of course. Here's what a not full, but mostly full system looks like, a sector more so. This is a sector. These are subsectors. It's 150 by 150 light years. Every sector is 15 by 15, and I believe there's 10 sectors by 10 sectors. Yep, 10 sectors by 10 sectors, 15 light years per sector, 150 light years for the whole sector. And then in the subsector, of course, you have star systems or objects of interest, being these purple marks. And then you have FTL lanes, which is for, safe FTL transit between the objects of interest or systems. And then, of course, you have these markings are literally not on most things. These are to represent the fact that this frontier sector is run by Sacred Grove, which is the faction that runs it, and they split their nation into different spheres of influence. So each one of these things, background things you see, represents a sphere of influence, from the inner worlds to the base worlds. Inner worlds, standard worlds are basically from here to roughly here. I mean, there's two different classes of those. Then there's the, border worlds. Then there's the frontier from there where they don't fully reach, but they have influence over the rest. We never figured it out, but when we were working forever ago on this, we were making the map. We were working on the map. And we decided that the subsector's name was going to be based on music because it kind of looks like a note, doesn't it? So we thought we'd have some fun and name it on a sort of a musical name for the subsector. But we never got around to it. Anyway. So yeah, FTL lanes connect, and it's simple things like that that create complexity in a world. And by that, I mean, yeah, of course, every point of interest has theoretically a location with data. I think you can see it on the bottom of our screen. Yep, data, like what's in the system and so forth. And then theoretically, a nation could have stats and lots of stuff complexity-wise. But what I mean is just as something as simple as FTL lanes can create complexity. Because this is technically a part of Sacred Grove, but if this is an independent group, like, because the Sacred Grove is a bunch of independent governments working together, held together by a main government, but let's say this one is independent. Strategically speaking, they want this system and this system, or at very least this system and this system. Due to safe FTL routes, and basically requiring safe FTL routes, it is hard for an enemy army to jump in if you have these two areas and you build defenses here and here. In order to get to you, they'll have to fight through your defensive location, then your second defensive location, in order to safely get to any of your other systems. Same with here. This would be a good strong point, and this would be a good strong point, and this would be a good strong point. Basically, you have a little chain of strong points, and that is literally created in the world by simply randomly placing FTL routes. And I suppose that's an important part of world building. Small things such as geography, I mean, in this case, it's not, geography, but geography when world building can create can create a significant impact on the world. So here, something as simple as FTL lanes can dictate where pirate bases might be, where a nation wants to set up its strong points, what is a valuable world. This world is not only theoretically a good strong point, but it's also a relatively good trade point because it connects to basically every system but here. This system is theoretically rather safe because you'd have to get through the strong points and then fight through every other system to get there, so it's valuable from that sense, but it only has two connections. It only goes to there or there. Of course, you can dangerous FTL elsewhere if you want to have significant risk of destroying a lot of your ships, or you could generate an FTL lane if you have enough money to and time to, go through the process of generating an FTL lane, or even destroying FTL lanes. But basically, not as good of a trade point as it has two connections, and it's so far away from being able to trade with everything. But also, despite being so far from trade, there are other benefits. What if it has rare resources, which is an option? Or a rare star system object, which might make it valuable despite its lack of trade. So while an object with, let's say, a thing similar, with a rare system object, with rare resources and all that, were here, that would be even more valuable given all the routes from it. While here it'd be less valuable, but it would still be valuable. It'd be harder to get to. And so, just all these little factors affect things. Let's see. And so simple things like that affect a world. Not just a world, but, like a universe. All these things affect. And of course, this being a sector is still nothing. So that's when people say space is big, Our galaxy is a bit small, given the fact that we use, like I said, we use a bit of convenience. The galaxy's not technically 2D, but we count everything on a 2D grid because it's easier for galaxy mapping. It's so much easier because, I mean, we could do it the complex way, but that adds so much more calculations and travel. That's just so much easier to handle. But since it's flat, we can't really do density of up and down. We can say things are up and down, but we can't really do density, you know, and distance-wise. So our galaxy is less dense than a normal galaxy. But let's see scale. So this is a system. Let's zoom in here. This is a system. Systems can have a lot of objects. Usually the average is anywhere from 0 objects to 20 objects. 0 being just a central star or nebula or whatever. You can have theoretically more than 20, but the base max is 20. This thing has 17 objects. This one system has an unstable planet with a moon, an asteroid field, a gas giant, an ice giant with 4 more moons, an asteroid field, a gas giant with nothing, an icy planetesimal field with a bunch of little icy planetesimals, a gas giant with a unique orbiting object, a ring system, nothing in the ring system, asteroid field, gas giant, asteroid field, etc., etc., etc. This thing, barren planet, ring system, 8 moons. Those moons could have life on them. They could be jungle moons or whatever. That's more than 8 moons. That's 8 moons, heavy cloud cover, 3 moons, 7 moons, and 4 additional moons. So that's a lot of moons. But basically, each of those can have a world map. Each of those can have a world map. Each of those world maps is a full-on world map. How do I put this? Each of those world maps can have cities and encounters and, you know, grids and people scale. Like, you know, entire, most settings in like D&D are on a continent. Like, you could have entire continents, entire everything on a world, and then nations and all that. Then you zoom out and you have multiple objects. From a world, you have all these objects in the system. From that system, you have these FTL connections and a subsector. From that subsector, you have a sector. This is a sector. This is a full sector without FTL connections, but all the connections that could be in there. Then from there, you have this. This map has every single square, every little white square, being a sector. For visual terms, this is literally just here. This isn't what this system looks like, if I recall. This one's just here for a visual representation of what scale it looks like here. This would be that entire sector with its own little light years, 150 by 150. Each square a sector. Each one of these sort of a mega sector. 10 by 10 sectors, I believe. It's 10 by 10. Yep, 10 by 10 sectors. Then you have, well, don't really know the terminology for it. We just go call it a gigasector because what's bigger than mega, megabyte, gigabyte, so forth. But then you have this, which is 150 sectors by 150 sectors. And that's not even the galaxy. That's not even the galaxy. So each one of these squares is literally all of that with, I believe, at average. Let's do the math. Give me half a second. If you're using non-jump, if you're using non-FTL gates, non-jump gates, let's see. It would take you, without jump gates, not counting lines. If you, for some reason, across the entire direct top of this thing, there was entire FTL lanes and not, you know, the entire fact that FTL lanes go up and down and randomly swirled and don't always connect between things, just traveling straight across is 6 days to a week to cross here with a ×1 FTL drive, which is a military grade FTL drive. So a week to cross there with a military grade FTL drive. And then you see like, this is civilized space. Did I have it down? Unfortunate, I don't. There's more to the map. There's actually more to the map that was like made, like, as you can see, the nations that Terran Breakaway go off the edge here. That's because they actually goes down. We just don't have that other sector square there. And same with up here. It goes up and it goes over here. And there's more to the map over here. But that's not even the galaxy. If you want to know galaxy scale, so of course we go down and there's, you know, light years in a sector. This entire thing, if we were to see the galaxy, this isn't the center, but if this was the center, you're looking at I believe 10 of these. 10 to 20. Unfortunately, the thing is in the way. We'll use a circle. It makes this so much easier if we use a circle. Here we are. Oh, I know why I'm not doing this right. Because every square is 150. Which has thrown my math off. Here we are, almost set. My apologies. Wrong layer. That's always great. I think this is accurate. No, maybe. I forget. Look, doing the math is not. I think that's right. The galaxy might be something like that, scale-wise. I'd have to go back and spend some time doing the math, but I think it's like that, I think. Of course, this isn't accurate to the placement of the galaxy. If you want to be technical, I know for a fact that this location of the core sectors should be somewhere like here in the galaxy. It's just a bit up and left of the center. The center of the galaxy is, I believe, here. I mean, on the circle here. I'm comparing it to the square. I believe it would be here, something like that. Anyway, point I'm trying to make is basically that entire circle and each square within it being 150 and 150 light years, and then all the way down to, you know, singular light years. Space is big, and each one of those can have nations, and of course, I mean, you see some of the major nations. These are what we call major nations, given that they have multiple sectors. Anything with multiple sectors is a major nation. I believe one sector plus. You have to have a bit more than one sector as a major nation. And then from there, there's mid-tier nations, which are slightly smaller, and minor nations, which have like 1-star system to 20-star systems or something like that. I believe they're a couple of subsectors or something. And yeah, nation scale goes all the way to things like the Council. The Council has a nation-scale sheet. The Empire has nation-scale sheets. Every nation goes about its business and all that, and fight each other. Like, you see the tokens there, because, nations taking actions, and of course, we try and do scale accurately. Space nations on that scale are fielding quadrillions, probably plus, I don't know the word for it, but are fielding literal uncountable amounts of soldiers. The insectoid hives, even more than the Terrans. I mean, all the alien species out there, but the insectoids, due to the fact that there's so many insects, not every bug is an insectoid, but their nations are densely packed. Like, we're talking the wars out there, billions upon billions upon billions. Like, billions isn't even probably the correct word. We have Dyson swarms, literally probably larger than quadrillions of people are simply fighting, let alone citizens in the galaxy. Like, just the scale of it is ridiculous for major nations. They can throw things out there forever and make no progress. Which is why galactic wars take hundreds of years. Because traveling between things, not necessarily hard given FTL, but just the scale of sieging a star system that has, I mean, low-tier star systems, you're looking at, when I say low-tier, I mean galactic average. You're looking at 100 to 200 billion people. And then if you look at a Dyson swarm, you're looking at quadrillions of people, but Dyson swarms are rarer than the standard systems. But basically, you're looking at just scales that just constant sieging and all that. I mean, even I could not siege a Dyson swarm. My forces are still sieging a Dyson swarm. Specifically, lore-wise, I have a small set of, well, a large fleet. I say a small set. It's a large fleet sieging, literally, the Sacred Grove capital. This system, with its data displayed right there. I'm sieging that system as we speak to try and get it to be my 4th star system. Because then I'll theoretically be able to seize a new title. If I get that system, not only will I have a Dyson Swarm, I'll be able to raise my title. But, unfortunately it's not going well. Dyson Swarms are ridiculous. And I don't have a Dyson Swarm, so I made a bit of a mistake sieging a Dyson Swarm. We have some stations. Luckily, they're not a unified force. If they were like the Council, I would have lost instantly. Well, not instantly, but a unified Dyson swarm against a small fleet. A fleet of millions, don't get me wrong. A fleet of millions of starships, but it's not enough. And, so we're trying to seize a few stations, and it's going slow. I'm pretty sure we won't see it. I mean, even with advanced Imperial tech, it's not like we're going to seize the star system anytime soon. But, that's just how it goes. Anyway, I believe that's enough rambling for the day. We'll call it short there. I have some things to prepare for a match. Got to get some stuff prepped for players and all that. I have to make a map and all that. So I have stuff like that to work on. So we'll call it there. I also want to work on fixing systems and all that. Just constant Galactic Requiem work. I'll also try and get some more work done on the lore video series, prepare the news video series, and we'll hopefully get our technical stuff fixed so we can play some games. Anyway, thank you all for stopping by. It was mostly rambling today. Next time, theoretically, is Solo Sunday, in which we run the campaign, the solo campaign. So there's that. Thank you all for stopping by. I hope you enjoyed our rambles. Hopefully next time we'll do more on next World Building Wednesday. Hopefully we'll do more direct world building or something. And yes. See you next time.